Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Automotive Logistics Livestream Hour. So pleased to have you with us from around the world today, talking about a very important topic: sustainable packaging, ways that we can improve packaging, reduce emissions, waste to landfill, and indeed energy in the supply chain through packaging. So really excited for the guest panel that I'll be joined with in a little while, including John Ferry from Lucid and packaging expert Rodney Salmon. We'll have an engaged dialogue, plenty of time for questions from your side, so keep them coming, and we'll get to it. But before that, just wanted to put this a little bit into context, and firstly thank our partner for this special live stream, our IPL Macro, who are a manufacturer of sustainable and returnable packaging. So of course, indeed, have solutions very relevant to what we'll be talking about today. So do check out information on them on our website, and indeed more from them, because they're highly focused and specialized in this area. So what's our topic for today? Of course, talking about sustainability, we can ask the question, is packaging a force for waste or a force for good in sustainable automotive supply chains? I think we all know that the answer is it can be both if we're not careful and don't pay attention to the right KPIs and drivers in this, whether it's adding extra weight, whether it's lost containers, whether it's using one way when we could go returnable, or indeed not paying attention to the origin of some of the packaging that we're using as well. It has a critical role to play, and it's something that we think is really important, which is why we've put this show together with our guests. And indeed, in the discussions, research, reporting that Automotive Logistics has been doing across the industry, what you see on the screen are indeed some of the areas that are coming really to the fore when we talk to people across the industry. And in fact, for many of you, I hope joined us at the Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Live global virtual conference back in September, we had a number of panels and discussions where we really dug into efficiency in packaging and the role of sustainability. And I wanted to just show you, take you back to a session with a bit of a highlight, some highlights of key areas. So I'm just going to play you a clip from some initiatives we heard about during that panel, which will kick us off with some discussion today. So play that.
So kind of just an overall look at how we're handling sustainability. It's at the heart of almost every decision we make as a packaging department at an EV company. We're trying to find and foresee potential problems downstream after we launch. So we're looking at all of our use cases for expendable packaging inbound and how we might be able to utilize those as a second life. So we've identified some opportunities there, and we're trying to bring everything into our plant with a purpose after it's utilized. We're also doing life cycle analysis and greenhouse gas emission, warm analysis, making sure that everything that we do implement will make sense to the environment and financially.
We're looking at converting as many trucks as we can over to alternative fuel, but in addition to that, we're going to be implementing more returnables and more reuse of our packaging material. So those are our main priorities and our large focus points for this coming year or the coming 5 years.
There's various initiatives that we are looking at here to really optimize packaging, avoid all of the landfill and waste. Yeah, and another idea that we've now implemented as well, which is a reusable tray. Yeah, it's basically a one-way tray that's once it has arrived and empty, it will just be ground down to the raw material. So the compressed, let's say, return shipment is really high density and saves you a lot of return transport, and then it's made fresh again and recycles about 80% of the material.
Okay, so some highlights there from what was from Ford of Europe, from Toyota North America, and from Rivian, of course, startup EV, and we'll get a chance soon to hear from another important startup EV. So a chance to compare some notes there. I also wanted to just get a chance while we have our global audience here to ask a question, ask you all to reflect a little bit on what the most important area of packaging that you're focusing on. So I'm going to put up a poll that I'd like you all to vote on, please. Questions coming out to you now. which is which area of packaging have you focused on most over the past 12 months for your automotive packaging? And if you could just please select one. We know they're all important, but select the one which you focused on most. Is it pack density? Is it switching from one way to returnable wherever possible? Is it lightweighting your packaging equipment? Is it use of reusable or recycled packaging, dunnage, inlets, or is it indeed the elimination of duplicate lost containers? So if you might just give us your vote, we'll share the results. It'll just give us a bit of a sense of what our audience is focused in on. And I know from looking at the registration, we're quite a global mix of OEMs, packaging specialists, LLPs, and tier suppliers. So should be an interesting sample. And I can see already that it's going to be a very tight race. In fact, I would say at the moment it's a three-horse race. 2 are in front. One is catching up. It's quite exciting seeing it from this point of view. You can't see there, but I'm going to close it because we're coming up to about 70% of you who've already voted, which is quite a good turnout rate, as recent elections have implied. So I'm going to close that poll and share the result. And it was, as I mentioned, it was a tight race, but just nipping ahead at the end was pack density, just slightly ahead of switching from one way to returnable, although not a million miles behind was the use of reusable, recycled material, and obviously a bit further down there on the others. That will be some interesting fodder for discussion when we come upon later, especially with some of our experts as well. Thanks for sharing those views. So let me get back to our presentation for a moment here. Indeed. So before we move on to our panel, I want to again, one of the speakers you heard from in the first video clip was Jake Goodman from Rivian, who did raise quite an interesting initiative that we just wanted to again highlight here for this audience and for our discussion on an initiative to use ocean plastics in totes and bins. So I think it's a really an interesting program, and let's just hear a brief clip about that.
How Rivian is utilizing ocean-bound plastic is really, it's been over a year in development, and we've worked on recipes starting with structural foam. So that's your larger bulk bins and your pallet systems, because that recipe was stable, the ratio was working. And I'm excited to say that we've recently been able to adapt that same concept and methodology into our high pressure systems. So that's your totes and your lids and some other high pressure injection molding systems. We're going to try to push as many inbound parts into our plastic returnable systems as we can, trying to come up with new ideas and new designs that utilize plastic so we can further our impact using the ocean-bound plastic material.
Okay, again, that was just again another interesting initiative, one that we at Automotive Logistics found very interesting and relevant for our audience. So interested to hear from you all if it's something that you're also focused on in your packaging supply chains. And another topic, again, I'm just trying to give you a bit of an overview of what kind of discussion points we're going to look to cover today, and what else we've been picking up from the industry. On the lightweight packaging side, a gentleman we will be joined with on the panel later, Rodney Salmon, particularly highlighted the opportunities in lightweight packaging and in replacing metal stillages, and indeed the role that the switch to EV could play in that, which again, I'd rather let you hear it straight from the horse's mouth, so to say. So let me give you a big short clip from that too.
Plastic stillages are saving around about 80 kilos per bin, plastic from metal. I think one OEM has particularly come up with a replacement of 72,000 metal stillages, and each trip those 72,000 metal stillages do, they save 5.4 million kilos in weight on their trucks. Especially with lighter parts coming in with electric vehicles, there's no need to move product any longer in heavy metal stillages. We've got to stop poisoning the supply chain. All the OEMs have had massive fines for not complying with emissions. Well, packaging is the same.
Sorry about that there, just had to switch through. So a couple of thoughts and provocations and ideas ahead of bringing into our panel, which I'm going to turn to in a moment. Just before I do, this theme of sustainability in the supply chain is an extended topic for us, one that we're covering across channels. And so I would also just like to highlight something we have going on next week as well. We're going to be talking about green strategies for production. So in the manufacturing processes, whether it's reducing waste to landfill, whether it's using green energy or sustainable materials and steel, for example. And we'll be joined by key speakers and guests from Scania and also Mittal, and I hope it's something you'll look to join as well. We put the registration link in the chat, so you'll all have that. Sign up and join us. It's hosted by our sister brand, which we're also responsible for, Automotive Manufacturing Solutions. So make sure you tune in then. But back to the matter at hand, and then it's my pleasure now to start turning to our panel and introduce our first guest. John Ferry is Packaging Design Manager for Lucid Motors, of course, an EV startup out of California with a plant coming online in Arizona, and an exciting new model, the Lucid Air, which I believe is going into production next year. And John oversees the packaging, engineering, and design there. So really excited that John could join us. And if John, would you join me on our virtual sofa? We'll have some time. John, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. So can we just start with a brief overview of Lucid's packaging operations and strategy as you're gearing up for production next year?
Sure. So we are on one angle, we have expendable packaging, and we specify all of the several thousand. We specify packaging design for all the several thousand parts on the car. And that is a huge effort. We also look at returnable packaging, and we're going to have a lot of projects coming online at launch, which is really exciting. We also, in our packaging department, control shipping labels and driving label compliance. So there's kind of a good synergy of those two compliance activities, packaging design, and shipping labels as well.
Fantastic. And as a startup, as a company that is able to begin from the ground up, would you point to any different approaches in terms of the sizes and standards that you're establishing, kind of getting a chance to potentially get it right from the get-go, as opposed to perhaps some of the legacy scenarios we might see at other OEMs?
Right. Its compliance with standards is lower than you might think industry-wide. I've heard various studies, but when you get very big, even having something in your guidelines without the effort behind it to enforce those standards, you'll probably fall flat. So within North America, we are using more or less the AIAG guidelines on pallet sizes. So when it comes to that, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. It's been coordinated already. But things get a little murky when we're talking about the global supply chain and the various standards used around the world. So between Europe, between Asia Pacific, you'll find a lot of different sizes. We are using one that is common with a couple other automakers. Ford and Tesla, I believe, on their international footprints have something similar to what we're using, and I think that would be great if the industry could coalesce on those international shipping standards and international footprints.
Absolutely, and I think that might be something we turn to in a bit, because of course Lucid does indeed have a fairly international supply chain, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. We, one thing, when I first heard Casa Grande, Arizona, I was like, I'm not sure of a lot of industry around there. We are about 6 hours away from the Ford plant in Hermosillo. So that's promising, and there is a fair amount of industry in the area. But yeah, combined with our, there's sort of two factors in play. Obviously, our volume as a startup wouldn't lend itself to the same kind of localization you might see from a Detroit launch, or something in that geographic established automotive areas. And then another driver is that our engineers have been working on this car for 4 years at this point, and there are a lot of technological firsts. And the more you push the technology, the harder it can be to find a qualified supplier out there. So in some cases, we have to scour the world and to find the people who can get it done and deliver what we've been dreaming up for this vehicle.
Absolutely. Well, some potential interesting opportunities for some container loops with Mexico there, as you've just kind of highlighted, given the location. John,
Yeah.
obviously the topic of the session is talking about sustainability in packaging. And again, I wonder how much of a role for you as leading the engineering and the packaging strategy here, how much of a role is sustainability playing from the decisions you're making? Clearly, efficiency is important. We all know that, but in terms of other sustainable imperatives that might come into these making these decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're closing in. We're in single-digit months from our start of production, and trying to get as many ideas into play as possible for reusing materials or finding some kind of second life that isn't the landfill. So that takes a lot of coordination with, say, local vendors in Arizona, and looking for grants and trying to work the system to the best of our ability. So yes, sustainability. I liked the poll that you took at the top of the hour. What are the sustainable initiatives? And that the number one was density improvements. So if you walk around a lot of plants today, what you'll see, you might see a lot of mediocrity when it comes to automotive packaging design density. At least I see mediocrity, and it's kind of the nature of the beast, given you have a small team, they're doing thousands of things, and it's easy to pass it through, and even more so easy when all you have to do is look at the last model year of whatever was done last year. So we're putting a huge amount of effort into getting world-class designs in our supply chain. But aside from that, there's lots of ideas that we're trying to implement for finding a second life for any expendable material at the plant.
Excellent. And what would you identify? Would you identify as some of the biggest opportunity areas, particularly for Lucid? Again, whether that's because you're EV or whether that's because you're just starting from scratch, that you want to move and avoid that mediocrity, as you put it, kind of, right from the start. Yeah,
absolutely. So wood pallets can usually be resold. So that's a great thing. The pallets don't. They also at some other plants will go to the incinerator to generate energy. But really reselling and giving the material a second life is the right thing to do. So that's our approach on pallets. And on corrugated board, we're looking for the best way to recycle it, looking for reuse cases where possible, and the standardization of our packaging sizes will lend itself to all those opportunities. And on On foam, we are looking at these foam densifying machines. So they'll take your expanded foams and densify them into compact cubes. So we think that'll be our best sort of initiatives there. And then we are going through some of our high volume running plastic thermoform trays and seeing, can we get a second life out of those via regrind or some other means.
Great, so some really concrete examples there. So appreciate that, and I think for our audience, it's all interesting for them to hear on those opportunities and obviously maybe reflect on where some could help. We're having loads of questions come through as well, which is fantastic. What we'll do is we'll just a few more questions for John one-on-one, then we'll talk to Rodney, and then we'll bring together in the panel. So anyone in the audience, just keep those questions coming, and we'll turn to them. But there's a lot of interest in what you're saying and what's going on here. But one thing is, you mentioned labeling, you know, right at the start as part of your responsibility. Not always something that falls into the toolkit or the wheel of the packaging department. Talk a little bit about what that is and what that means for Lucid.
Sure. So you know, a lot of our barcode technologies have been around since the 80s and 90s, and labeling was also a new topic to me, and it's fascinating to see the zillions of ways they're used, not just in automotive, but all around the world. How barcode technology is used. So the kind of you know, really great thing that we're shooting for is a label that would enable one-shot goods receipts of entire pallets on the dock. So trailer is unloaded, material is staged, and boom, 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 receive all those pallets. So we've been working hard on a standard which will achieve that, and a barcode technology which is in pretty wide use, used by a few other automakers, and that's our goal is to come up with a label that enables, you know, the really high volumes of material that are unique to automotive, that would enable one-shot goods receipts at the pallet level.
Okay, great. And maybe a last question before we turn to Rodney for a bit and then bring in the panel. On the on Lucid's returnable packaging loops and pools. Now, this is something we know there's lots of different models that companies adapt, whether they own or lease or rent or work with a specialist. And can you give us any insight into where you're at with the decision, or if you've made a decision, or what might indeed influence and change that, or not change it, but influence that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to give you a cop-out answer that it's case by case, but it's obvious that when it comes to returnable, first of all, there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be in place that not everybody thinks about. It's not just a warehouse for staging and sending it back, but it's an overhead of meticulous management of those containers, and all of those loops and those suppliers, along with tons of coordination with the suppliers themselves. And if the returnable packaging has any kind of systems integration, then you just have a lot to do on every launch. So provided you have that network in place or that overhead in place and the right people around to just accomplish the task of managing the returnables, which is usually underappreciated. The cleanest application of your capital is to buy your own containers, and realize that price reduction from not using cardboard yourself, right? That's sort of usually your best case scenario. However, we are trying to look closely at opportunities where renting could make sense. We're a startup, so volumes are, you know, starting low, and in that case, the financials might lend themselves to rentals, either with you know, one of the several rental companies out there, Chat and Goodpack. are few where we've looking at opportunities.
Fantastic. Well, I wouldn't call it a cop-out answer. The question was simpler than the answer, and that's the way we like it as journalists, I think. But thanks for sharing us some insight on that, John. Hold those thoughts, and because we've got a bunch more questions, and as I mentioned, the audience is throwing a bit our way too. But I'd like to just turn a little bit to our next guest, Rodney. So, John, we'll bring you back in a couple of minutes, and thank you so much for that. So just as a quick introduction, there he is. Rodney Salmon is senior partner at Salmon RTP and has a wealth of experience, of course, across automotive supply chains. In fact, I think, Rodney, I was calling you Mr. Automotive Packaging on LinkedIn earlier. You know, it's probably not the worst thing you've been called, but thanks for joining. Rodney, thanks so much for joining. So, Rodney, I want to start. I played a clip earlier where you were actually emphasizing opportunities in lighter weight packaging, and it was perhaps interesting, perhaps disappointing, you know, where that came in the poll. Now, bear in mind that I had to force people to choose one, right? I did, you know, that doesn't imply that those things aren't important on the vote. But I thought maybe you can talk to us a little about what are the opportunities that you see there, whether in terms of the commodities or supply routes where you think we should stop poisoning the supply chain, as you eloquently put it.
Yeah, it really comes down to how we're looking at the supply chain and how we look at sustainability. And when you look at the savings, and I did point out an example of the savings that you can save by just moving over to lighter weight packaging, okay, and also at a reduced cost as well. And the amount of kilometers that you can save, that one particular OEM was going to actually save 630 million kilometers of weight coming off their trucks, all right, on an annual basis, just changing over from metal stillages to plastic. In fact, you know, this actually is not new in any means. The US automotive supply chain changed over to extended length folding plastic pallet boxes some 25 years ago and used them predominantly instead of steel stillages. Steel stillages still have their value when you're talking about something carrying anything from 1,500 kilos up to 2,000 kilos, 4,000 pounds, and being sort of slightly outside the logistics dimensions. But lightweighting is so important. I mean, I saw a horror story only last week where I walked into a factory and saw a huge metal stillage there, okay, weighing 190 kilos, actually taking 33 kilos of product. Now that's got to stop. We cannot carry on with that. That is totally unsustainable. There's no reason for it. And I would love to go and just sit with people and just say, please tell me the reason for using something like that.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you have had some of those conversations. Why do you think some automotive manufacturers haven't embraced those opportunities if they're kind of presenting so much opportunity?
Yeah, it's a question, Chris, I ask myself every week, actually. But yeah, I think it was interesting listening to John. He said, well, we've got a small team doing thousands of things. And I think that is a major part of it. You know, I'm not here to criticize packaging engineers or anything like that or jump on their backs. But I do think that, you know, time is a big element on it. Okay, time is a big element on the fact that do they have time to actually look at justifying a new case? You know, they've got to look at several things. They've got to create a business case. They've got to justify it to their senior management and board, and they've got to be brave enough to stick their head above the parapet and say, I want to go with this. I think this is a great opportunity to lighten, etc. Okay, and then they've got the other one. Well, you know, the people in purchasing are only going to pick the cheapest product anyway. So why do I need to go to this? And by the way, we used this out last time. Let's just carry on using the same thing. Okay, I haven't got time to justify it. And I think a multitude of those things have got a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, you know, I asked John before about the role sustainability is playing at the early stages of their packaging engineering and strategy, or at least at the startup stages of that. Do you think sustainability is becoming more important for OEMs and tier suppliers when they make packaging decisions? Is it greenwash? Are they really doing it, or are you starting to see that play a role?
Well, I said to a couple of people in the last 2 weeks when I was asked the same question, I said, go upstairs and knock on the door of the CFO of any OEM and asking how many millions his last check for was exceeding the emissions. And you'll realize how serious it is. And going on with that, I mean, ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance, is now such a huge effect on the big investment companies investing in companies. This is a real area that they're starting to look on. And as a director of any company, you know, your social and corporate competence is a real risk value. And so sustainability is huge. And therefore really reducing emissions, understanding how to reduce emissions, and therefore lightweighting trucks has many, many advantages.
So yeah, again, and we'll bring John back on soon enough so the engineers can speak up for themselves as well. But I think he takes some of that point as well when he referenced the model years and the, you know, not just doing what was always done. Are there any other kind of concrete tips and advice that you'd give to packaging engineers to really reduce environmental waste and emissions in the decisions they're making?
I think it's really trying to get a lot more help from the suppliers out there, a lot of packaging suppliers. You know, they've got a wealth of experience, these packaging suppliers, they've got a wealth of ideas, okay? And, you know, any good packaging supplier will actually substantiate what he's trying to market and what he wants to sell. And sustainability is a big part of that, in understanding the recyclability, the reuse, okay, the lightweighting of it, and looking at the returnable and definitely foldable market out there. It's you know, go to your suppliers, your packaging suppliers, and ask them to come up with proof, ask them to come up with these ideas, because that's what they're there to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, on the subject of the returnable side, you know, there are, as John was just talking about, many different loops and pools and different areas to do that in. But of course, one of the things, and it was a bit evident in our poll earlier as well, is many companies struggle, of course, with lost equipment, waste, you know, lack of kind of visibility. What do you think can be done to improve that?
Well, I mean, it's not a black and white thing, but the closest thing is pooling. I mean, I'm sure there's many OEMs and tier suppliers during 2020 of which they'd actually had to pooling, okay? Being able to have the right amount of packaging at any one time, only pay for what you use, and be able to just rent it without capital expenditure. I mean, to be quite honest, really, you know, to run that kind of industry, you know, you've got to pick a pooler. I mean, there's a huge RFQ just come out this week from a major OEM for over 6 million totes, okay, which is going to be pooled. And absolutely right, you know, you only use what you have at the time, and you only pay for what you use.
Interesting. So, and when we think about, I mean, maybe you can't name a name anyway, but would you point to any examples, leading examples in the industry at the manufacturer level, supplier level, or et cetera, where you do see real leadership and trailblazing when it comes to sustainable packaging?
Well, it's difficult to point to any one area, because there are a few. I mean, you know, there's a lot of effort being made and a lot of success stories in the last 4 or 5 years with regard to using returnables, and also with the environmental aspect coming into it. I think that we heard from Axel van der Kerk the other day about the way they handle their engineering parts from the powertrain, and how they actually recycle every single tray that's used after one use, and then make the new trays out of the same material for reuse again. And that's an extremely clean environment. It's 100% recyclable product. That's very environmentally friendly and also very cost effective as well. And again, you look at areas of improvement of going back to the lightweight again. You know, we're seeing in Europe now extendable containers that are taking, you know, plastic, that are taking huge weights out of the supply chain. And going forward with EVs, electric vehicles, fuel cell, hydrogen, etc., right? All the parts are going to be lighter. And therefore, you don't want to weigh out your vehicle with heavy metal packaging, heavy steel packaging, okay, when you can put more parts on with lighter weight packaging.
Excellent, Rodney. Well, we're going to turn to our panel now, and I'll bring John back. John, if you please join us at your leisure. As you're coming back, John, I want to run a second poll because it's a little bit on the topic, partly what you mentioned, Rodney. It's just to get a sense of I guess the distances and things that maybe packaging are traveling in the industry, and that could be an interesting touch point. So I'm going to run this poll. Questions coming to you all now, if you can reflect on it. Now, we've taken some guesses here. Obviously, it's a very at a general kind of level in terms of what how many kilometers or miles your automotive packaging might travel in a year. So this is a little bit finger in the air, but give us a sense. Is it like 150,000 miles or 250,000 kilometers? Is it more like 3 million? Is it more like 30 million? Obviously it depends on your companies and stuff, but it's just to get a snapshot of what our audience kind of has visibility of the sorts of distances that we're moving packaging around, and that's what we're kind of looking to there. So if you could, we're collecting responses now. So if you can just let us know your thoughts. And again, I can see quite an interesting spread here, and it is as should be, given we have a diverse audience, as I mentioned, which is not just one sort of company or size company. So there's no one definitive answer here, to say the least. But the spread is interesting, and I'm quite interested to share it with you in a moment. I'll just let that vote climb up a little bit more. It looks like we're just about finished. So let's share it. And as you can see, it's quite a split from some of you moving very, very wide and far. In fact, it's pretty even between actually the biggest. So okay, 600,000, so about 1 million kilometers per year is just about the most in our audience, but it's very close by 30 million. So we've got obviously 50 million kilometers. We've obviously got some big players out there. This just tells you, gives us a little bit of sense of the spread of distances traveled. And I think, one thing, I guess, just to kind of put it to our panel, is what that tells you, right, about just how far and wide the emissions may be going. And so, maybe starting with you, John, do you see carbon emissions in the supply chain, driven in part by packaging and other things, as a key factor and metric for Lucid, as you go into production and implementation?
We're starting to dig into the finer details of a lot of those analysis. That's the sort of asterisk about returnable packaging and being greener, is that you do have this emissions of driving the packaging back and doubling the length of whatever that inbound lane was. So we are trying to take green impacts into account on some of our returnables. In a lot of scenarios that I've seen in North America, sometimes if you have a lane that's very far, the transportation contract will be written in a way that you sign up the driver to drive there and back to his origin either way. I've seen some loops like that before, and once we realized that he was already going back to his origin as a part of his standard contract for the inbound lane, set off a lot of light bulbs, and we try to find those opportunities and use them wherever we can.
Fantastic. And Rodney, I mean, I think that the poll there spoke a little bit to some of the points you raised, right, around some of the distances and the impact that weight can have. Any other reflections from your side about what we saw there? I mean, 25% of our audience is moving 50 million kilometers, of packaging in a year. So obviously there's a lot of room there for improvement.
Well, absolutely. I mean, just go to a minimum. Just imagine if you could take 25% of that weight out of a trailer, of how much savings there would be. And one of the things that surprises me is that the large LLPs, they sort of haven't jumped on this bandwagon of offering lighter weight packaging or suggesting lighter weight packaging, because the lighter their trailers move every 100 kilometers, there's a big saving. And it's not just on fuel costs, it's not on emissions. They've got tires, that wear out with heavier loads on. And this whole lightweighting situation is going to be looked at, because all the parts coming in for electric vehicles are going to be a lot lighter than the ones for combustion, that's for sure.
Fantastic. Well, there's lots of points to pick up then. Now, I want to turn to a few of our audience questions, because again, I've got, and just as a warning, I have probably 15. So I'll say right now that we won't get to all of them, but we will make sure that our panel gets them, and John and Rodney will perhaps arrange some follow-up if we need to, or another recording just to go through them, because there's lots of good ones here. But I want to take one here, which is, I think, a good question on the kind of plastic container topic. And it's actually, what do you think of using plastic containers, be it LFC, Eurobin, in the welding shop, in terms of safety and fire risks and stuff like that? So, is that a limitation for using some of this equipment? I'll start with you, Rodney.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things that's put plastics off, especially in robotic welding, where sparks are flying around in body and white. And it's been an interesting topic. There is a supplier that's developed a folding large container with deflammable product in it. Okay, and that's been tested, and actually doesn't catch a light at all within that environment, even with a naked flame by it for a period of 1-2 minutes. So there is a lot of work already done on this. There are inflammable plastics about, and so you can do this. Yeah. But it depends which OEM you go into, or which body in white plant or stampings plant you go into, because one of the things that you will see a lot of in some of these plants now are the small plastic totes. You'll see, but you won't see the large folding large containers. So there's got to be a reason for that. And yes, this type of plastic equipment is available, within the supply chain and from suppliers right now.
And what about from you, John? Is that a consideration in again at this stage in introducing materials like that in different parts of the plant? Maybe not. Is that a limitation for Lucid as well?
Yeah, that's Rodney kind of hit it on the head. Safety standards differ plant to plant, and aggressiveness in fire risks in at the body shops. One interesting trend in the industry is going away from welding and more towards adhesive use on bodies.
Okay.
I know that Arrival is sort of proud of a body that uses adhesives, and that's happening in a lot of places. Self-piercing rivets is also being used where normally you may have had a weld. So I think the technologies in the vehicle, and especially in the body shop, will drive less sparks, less fire less fire risk than you might normally have.
So I think I'll take another audience question before we go to. I have a few other ones. So Rodney, I know John, you're still there, disappeared for a second. This one is addressed specifically to you, John. What is the international pallet size that Lucid is currently using or trying to normalize as an industry standard? I think you did make reference that you were using one common one, but I wasn't sure if actually there's, again, maybe a couple of different ones given. And maybe you can clarify this. I think you have supply chains out of Asia, Europe as well, right? So it's probably varies a bit there.
Sure. So it's 1200 by 100, or sorry, 1200 by 1000 millimeters is a typical size in Europe. This size is slightly trimmed down in both dimensions to 1140 by 980. And it's been found that in the high volume environment of rapid loading and unloading of sea containers, slightly trimming down that 1 meter by 1.2 has been beneficial to making sure you get good utilization every time, and making sure you have a little extra room to fit, you know, and unload and load.
Great. And then another question that came in specifically for you, John. Has Lucid considered metal container packaging for heavier EV components?
Yeah, we have. So things like battery packs and our motors, we are using plan to use metal-based packaging, steel racks, which is what I've seen elsewhere.
Yeah, and actually I could have clarified at the beginning of the hour. Of course, you worked for several years as well in Tesla's packaging as well. So certainly you have perspective there, and that sort of lets me kick off another question to both of you. And I'm starting with you though, John. If you can you give us a little bit of insight into some of the specific irregularities or requirements for EV packaging, related packaging, as it might differ, or as say providers and suppliers who are interested in what they need to consider in supplying you and working with you, given obviously experience at Lucid, but also as mentioned at Tesla previously.
Was the question on lithium-ion battery specifics or battery?
Let's start with that. That's a good place to start. I mean, there may be other areas that you would reflect on too, but I think the lithium-ion battery is probably the most obvious place to start.
Was it on regulations? My mind started going as you.
Yeah, no worries. No, I mean regulations, of course, play a role in the battery shipping, but I was more in mind of the packaging requirements that come with this, or be it the standards or equipment, how this changes your approach to packaging, or considerations that suppliers and providers need to keep in mind when they would be working with Lucid or indeed other EV manufacturers.
I see. So the battery electric vehicle platform is so much simpler. The typical parts that you see in internal combustion engine powertrain just aren't there. You have a zillion gears and timing chains and crankshafts and engine blocks, and all of that is gone now. The trend in the electric motors, I mean, they started as big as, say, like a big watermelon, and now I don't know, they're just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's really amazing how simplified the platform it is. It's really interesting that Tesla and a lot of these EV companies, they deliberately show a picture of the chassis itself, because it's so remarkable for anybody who's seen what cars look like and how they're engineered, how much simpler the battery electric vehicle platform is relative to traditional powertrains. So that simplification carries over into the supply chain, carries over into packaging, and yeah, it's in some ways it's a simpler process than it is to make internal combustion engine powertrains.
Rodney, I mean, I played that clip earlier where I think you were also making some reference to kind of EVs perhaps changing some of the mix of packaging materials that would use as well. Would you add anything to that here?
Well, we're seeing in lithium batteries, as John was talking about, an abundance in different sizes, abundance of different weights. There's no real continuity in the size or weights of the lithium batteries coming through. And also we're seeing basically going from a global supply right down to a more localized supply, where people are, especially in Europe, they're localizing their battery supply simply because of the restrictions that are on carrying batteries on a global, especially in air freight. And a lot of the packaging and returnable packaging has now been agreed to carry brand new lithium batteries. Okay, but then if they've got any damaged batteries, or you've got batteries that have got to be returned, or they've got to be they finished their life and got to go for recycling, then you've got to have a packaging that's covered by a dangerous goods certificate. Okay, and the dangerous goods certificates change from country to country, continent to continent, and so it's very difficult to get standardization. And we really need somebody to come up with some kind of standardization for packaging across the board, because at the moment you can take a battery, disused battery, and as long as that battery's been tested by the manufacturer of the battery into a certain packaging, it can be plastic, it can be metal, or it can even be expendable packaging. So the dangerous goods certification on these things is varied, and it really needs to be standardized. And that would be really innovative to actually be able to have that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we have quite a few questions around returnables, you know, actually, and again, like I said, more than we can get to here. So we'll definitely talk to you guys about some follow-up on some of these points. But I'll take one question here on regarding the choice of to use returnable or expendable. Do you consider the scope of throughput emissions related to the production of the packaging material itself? So if we really get down to sustainability in procurement, would you make, I guess this is for you, John, would you, as well as looking at the impact it would have in the obviously in Lucid supply chain, you know, would you look to the materials itself, look to the procurement and sustainability of that packaging?
Yeah, that's something we think about. If we're making anything custom, we always try to source it locally, so that the shipment to the supplier doesn't go across continents or countries. And the idea from Jake Goodman at the conference to use ocean-bound plastics, that was a really fascinating idea. It's interesting that he said it took a year to develop that. It touches on what Rodney says, that these really great projects take time. But yeah, absolutely, we give consideration to geographic location. We give consideration to materials, and try to make the right equipment with all that also satisfies greener needs.
Fantastic, absolutely. So, you know, we're getting closer to the end of the hour, so we've got a few more questions. We've got a couple of questions around the topic to do with returnables on the international side, and actually, maybe again, this is a moment just to have a very brief clip, because this was a topic that was discussed a little bit as well in our previous. So I'm just gonna quickly play this clip, and then we can reflect on that.
A huge gap that I find or I notice is international returnables. Just because it simply doesn't make sense for even the biggest OEM to be going back and forth overseas with returnables. But if there's like a pooling operation or something that we could do, utilizing a company like, say, CHEP, that we could all, like American OEMs could pool containers and share them back and forth with the European or APAC suppliers, I think that would be a pretty powerful statement or program that would really help.
We're actually working with our parent company in Japan, and we're looking to implement returnables for export movement. So what we're actually going to be doing is we're going to be taking the product that they send to us in metal totes, and then we'll be using that and rebuilding those totes with export manufacturing parts back to Japan. It's not easy. And it takes a lot of coordination, but we have an imbalance. So currently it comes from Japan, we remove the product, we use it, we break it down and we send it back. Well, now we're gonna fill those things back up and send them back. So that's something that's in the works right now.
Yeah, we piloted this.
Just to flag that, I mean, if we heard other examples during the event as well. I think Ford has been also doing some returnables with South Africa and other regions. So just because this is coming up on our audience as well, John, you mentioned, of course, having a very international supply chain. You know, it may not be at the start, but would a kind of international returnable loop be something you'd be interested in? Is it something you've been exploring, and what would be the challenges around that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first challenge is that you have a massive investment with the time on the ocean from, say, across any ocean is usually, some gauge it at 6 weeks. So, you know, if you think about a supplier in Chicago and an automaker in Detroit, you're talking about 3 hours transit, right? And that's 3 hours worth of containers, given whatever volume you're planning for. Now take that 3 hours and stretch it out to 6 to 8 weeks of production, and that's twice, right? So there and back, and the investment grows very, very fast, and it's harder to sell. So though that's the main challenge of international returnable, and if there is some kind of a pooling collaboration, I'd love to learn more about it and see if there's any good opportunities for Lucid.
Great. And Rodney, what would you? I mean, this is I think something you've looked at in projects as well too, haven't you?
Yeah, we've worked predominantly with DHL initially, then more recently with CHEP, and I think that Jake Goodman really answered his own question. And CHEP have a global pooling system now in place. You can rent ISO-C containers off them, for one trip only, and it's up to CHEP what they do with the bins after that and where they send them back. And its whole thing is by having, finding a returnable system. But it's not up to the OEM to do that. CHEP take that responsibility, and CHEP look after it, and they offer this service right now. So it's not something that isn't about. It's been about for 3.5, 4 years that I know of, having supplied some of the containers for it. And so it is, it is there to be taken up right now.
Okay, so opportunities abound. We're coming up to the end of the hour. And like I mentioned, so many more questions, so we'll do some follow-up. But let's look to the future a little bit. John, what's your hope and vision for Lucid's automotive packaging gains and improvements over the coming year, given it should be a critical year, obviously with SOP and I guess going from there. So talk to us about what some of the goals and ambitions that you have.
Sure. So we are trying to launch successfully, and it's once you have volume, a lot of these opportunities are easier to find. But we are trying to launch with world-class density and world-class returnable packaging, with no compromises.
That is certainly a good goal. So Rodney, again, was a last thoughts from your side in terms of hopes. You've been around the industry, a couple of years, but what do you really hope to see change and improve over, say, the next 1, 2, 3 years?
Well, I think we should follow the OEMs and the vehicle designers. They're lightweighting the vehicles. Everything's a lot lighter. Everything's a lot cleaner. I think this 2020 COVID-19 has brought a lot of new ideas into people's heads, a different way of going about their lives. Everything's going to be cleaner. You use announcement from the UK government today that they're not 10 years off the replacing vehicles, diesel vehicles by 2030. You're going to see a lot more of this, and with sustainability and as I mentioned earlier, ESG. It's so important that we maintain this sustainability, and it becomes a major part of where we're going, and taking millions of kilos off vehicles, moving packaging around the supply chain and other component parts is going to help dramatically, and I'd love to see that reduced down. I'd like to see 25% of the weight of the vehicles coming off within the next 2 to 3 years, and I think that's 100% feasible.
Great. Well, some very good ambitions and thoughts to end on. I think we almost got that. Would have almost been our very first ever live stream hour without mentioning the word COVID-19. But nonetheless, I think you brought it. I think you brought it up into exactly the right context there, and the opportunities to learn and develop. First of all, before I close, let me thank both of our guests, John Ferry from Lucid Motors and Rodney Salmon. This has really been a fascinating discussion. I can just tell you from the depth and length of questions that we've gotten here and comments, which I'm really keen to share with you after, and make sure that we take some time to go through them, because there's lots of technical questions around there. We just didn't have time to, but it just demonstrates the interest and the opportunities, I think, in this space, and the companies that are keen to go on these journeys, with you, companies like yours, John, and obviously with the solutions that you're talking about, Rodney. So thanks to both of you for sharing that insight, and we really look forward to sharing more with you. So as I close, I just also want to say thank you to our partners, sorry for that, partners, IPL Macro for this show and their support in supporting the live stream hour today. So thanks again to IPL Macro. A little bit of a flash forward. I mentioned next week we have our sustainability in production live stream. Don't miss us for that. But consider also a couple of weeks away, mark it on your calendar. We have a live stream hour on North Africa and the Middle East, routes to recovery in the region. We're going to be sharing some data from a recent report that we've been working on, covering regions like Morocco and Algeria, and of course Saudi Arabia, UAE, and looking at the implication for the supply chains. We'll be joined by Suleiman Palak, who's head of purchasing and supply chain for Africa and the Middle East at General Motors. So that'll be a great show. There's a link to register and join us, so get your spot now. That's in your chat, so don't miss it. We really look forward to that as well. Thanks again from my side to our guests, to IPL Macro, and very importantly to you, our audience, for your great questions, your engagement. We will have more to come on the topics you've raised and we didn't get to. The live stream hour is a product of our teams here at Automotive Logistics, Automotive Manufacturing Solutions, and Ultima Media, and my close partners in crime, Nimish Ladwa and Richard Logan. So get in touch with us if you have any questions, if you are interested in getting involved. We're always keen to hear your ideas and go deeper in this topics. Packaging, this won't be the last discussion we have on packaging, that's for sure. We'll be carrying it through more live stream hours, and indeed at a conference coming up very soon, which we'll be announcing right at the beginning of February, focusing on North America, but I'll have more on that for you soon. So thanks again, everyone. Wish you a great rest of the week. Stay safe, and talk to you, or we'll see you next week for sustainable manufacturing. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks again, guys.
Thank you. Cheers.